So thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here this afternoon, and I'm going to talk a little bit about an approach and a process that we're really using and have co-developed with another group to really expand the range of citizens, rural citizens, who are really willing to rationally consider the issues of climate change and the necessary steps to deal with it. And I also want to talk about how addressing climate change in rural communities needs to be different in certain ways, and how I think it's absolutely critical to reach this audience. So despite the urgency for action, U.S. climate policy is stalled. And rural constituents are actually among the most politically significant sources of this opposition. So rural resistance is in large part due to the complete neglect of this constituency from climate change activists and from U.S. climate change policy. And this has really allowed climate change in rural America to be primarily defined by the fossil fuel industry and its surrogates. And in the lack of pro-rural voices at the table, these deniers have filled the information space primarily with discussions around how increased regulation and taxation is going to cause a burden on rural America, and completely ignoring the other negative impacts on rural America, but more importantly, on the opportunity for rural America to derive some of the best solutions for adaptation to our climate change issues. So in general, rural citizens' views about climate change are based on their economic and social realities. But these realities differ from their urban counterparts in a couple of ways, primarily wages and the cost of energy. On average, rural residents earn less than their urban counterparts, and also pay a larger percentage of their income towards energy and transportation costs. In addition, current agricultural and farm and rural policy is pulling in the opposite direction of effective climate change policy. And you can see this, in rural communities, the largest cost for inputs for crop production comes in the way of pesticides and fertilizers and diesel fuel. So it really isn't a surprise that farmers would reflexively oppose any large talk about a climate change piece that looks to increase the cost of their fossil fuel inputs, especially as agricultural specialists and others haven't done a lot to move forward the ball on carbon-friendly farming opportunities. But we at IATP really believe that this movement, this opposition to climate change, is not immovable. So there's a positive piece in this, and research has shown that actually in Minnesota, 85% of the rural population feel that people, kind of like Michelle said, people like themselves can make an impact and can improve the local quality of life. And 75% of them actually believe that they can work together across their differences. So rural communities are optimistic, even despite feeling that they're maybe on the negative end. But I think that's more importantly because they have the biggest opportunity and the highest potential to gain from a shift away from a fossil fuel industry and fossil fuel energy and inputs. Whether it's renewable energy or a reinvigorated local food economy, the reality is that the production of our carbon-friendly economy will happen in rural communities. And much of the benefit can is to be emphasized, can be retained in those rural communities. So conventional thinking is really that climate change is too politically charged to talk about in rural America. But I absolutely disagree. I think the reality is that rural citizens are dealing with these realities of extreme weather directly. And therefore, they are interested in being part of the community and the political solutions. But the catch is that there's no marketing campaign, there's no quick answer of messaging that's going to shift the tide. For rural citizens and farmers to support this, they have to be able to come to these truths for themselves, and we need to bring ways to depoliticize the conversation. And the rural community climate dialogues, which I'm going to talk about, is an area that we have found strong belief as an avenue to do just that, and to be able to strongly influence the political sphere and to lead to sustainable systems change. So what are the rural climate dialogues? The IATP, the Institute for Agriculture and Trade Policy, we developed these rural climate dialogues in partnership with the Jefferson Center. IATP works at the intersection locally and globally around policy and practice issues that are trying to ensure a safe and fair, sustainable trade and farming system. And the Jefferson Center, which is a nonpartisan organization, is committed to strengthening democracy by advancing informed, citizen-led solutions. And these are solutions to challenging very tough issues through deliberation and community action. So it works like this. The Rural Climate Dialogues use a citizens jury model. And this is a model that brings together community education, problem solving, and leadership development. And a randomly selected, within the community that we work in, a randomly selected but demographically representative group of citizens, usually 15 to 8 of them, come together for a 3-day, very intensive, sometimes 4-day, but 3 to 4 day deliberate session. And recognizing that that's time out of their lives, usually a couple work days and a weekend, they're paid to be there, and that they're there from highly respected and have a responsibility on behalf of their community. And then with the help of a trained facilitated team, they are charged to create a shared community response to changing weather conditions and extreme weather patterns that are impacting their community. The panel has the liberty, they have the information, the resources, and the facts that they need to produce their own recommendations that respond to their community's opportunities, challenges, concerns, and values. And from there, these recommendations are a starting point for further community conversation and action, as well as a broader discussion for state, regional, and national policy. I'll go back one time. The other thing I want to emphasize is, what does this look like in rural communities? One of the things that in all of this citizens jury process that Jefferson Center has utilized is always using a fairly intensive stakeholder engagement process leading up. But what came out of working in rural communities that was not a surprise to me, coming from a community, was that every leader we talked to, every business leader, every local city administrator, were pointed back to the high school. They said, you know, we might be interested in engaging in this if the high school's interested, if the high school youth and the high school teachers are looking into this and are pushing for it. One of the very benefits in rural communities is that in most communities of the size that we're working with, they have one school, one public school. And what you still have here is you have this central public entity where all the youth and the parents and the grandparents, aunts and uncles are all gathered around and get a lot of information and a lot of civic pride from one central place. So we took this to heart. These are pictures here of the high school agricultural education class, and realized that if we're going to do this process, we have to also do it in the high school with the high school teachers leading up to the process. And I'll walk through that in our one community example. So we had our first rural climate dialogue in Minnesota, in Morris, Minnesota, which is in west central Minnesota. And the community looks like this. It's a population of about 5,000 people. It is about 3 hours from the Twin Cities metropolitan area. And it's really smack dab in the middle of prairie and row crop agricultural production. That's the primary driver of the economy and really the cultural makeup of the community. It also is unique from some communities. It is also a university town, which brought in actually new challengers. Yes, there was opportunities, but you deal with a community that's maybe been over-processed because they have the university there. So at the beginning, we know that to succeed, as we mentioned, we deal with a lot of stakeholder engagement. And that was working with local people to understand what are the issues, what are the weather issues in this community. Right off the bat, what rose to the top in this community was the extreme high winds, hailstorms, and extreme rain events that they'd had over the last 3 or 4 years. And we used this process to help develop a panel of experts. We prefer to have the experts come from the community as much as possible to address the issues that are most important to the community. So the Citizens Community Jury comes together for 3 days. And of those experts, over a day of those 3 days really is taken up by hearing from these experts. There were 7 experts, which started off in the middle from the state climatologist, Mark Seeley, who really did a great job and does a great job of laying out, specific to west central Minnesota or to the region he's working in, what has historically been the climate patterns over the last century, and how are we seeing that intensity change or the duration change, strictly showing the facts and the data. But followed that with a number of other presentations. The insurance industry. Many were concerned in this community after 3 years of being hit with hail on their property insurance. Would they be able to afford insurance, and what would happen as that cost went up? We heard from agricultural experts who talked both about the issues that were going to impact crop production, but also resiliency opportunities. And we heard from the local power company talking about energy use and efficiency, and another local company that maps energy poverty. So really, who's going to be the most impacted by increased energy costs? And they also heard about local infrastructure concerns from the city administrator. But critical to this, and prior to hearing from the experts, an important part of the facilitation process is that the jury goes through an extremely intensive simulation and training exercise. This is part of the training for them to understand how to identify key facts and how to ask good questions and understand how information is coming to them unbiased. Following the expert presentations, which was after the 3 days, the community, I actually get goosebumps just watching this happen for the first time, because coming from a rural community, I've talked with a lot of others, when you know there's an unauthentic process, your skin just kind of crawls, and it's not really working the way you see that it's really thriving with the community. But after 2 intensive days, I was there on the 3rd day, and this panel of 15 jury members crafted every single word of a 1-page statement that was the final outcome that they produced immediately following this, that was a statement to their neighbors. What do our neighbors need to know, and what should we do? And in that, they crafted every word to be sure that they were inclusive of everyone, that they weren't turning someone off, but that it was still extremely impactful, that it had action items, that it dealt with their top challenges and their top opportunities, and that it wasn't just negative. It really had solutions for building resiliency into their community as to how they were being impacted. I mentioned earlier that we realized with the citizens jury process that the students had to be involved. So in the months prior to the community process, we worked in the high school, and we worked with 3 teachers in the Morris community, and we brought some of these same experts to the classroom. This was much more not about driving solutions from the students, but giving them facts and teaching them how to deal with deliberation skills and how to have effective communication strategies. And then outside of the classroom, they actually went to their neighbors and their family, and they distributed a home energy survey dealing with their carbon footprint, and brought hundreds of these back that were used by one of the expert speakers to produce a more relevant map for this community of what their energy burden would be. But also, in the meantime, we're starting that conversation with their parents and with their neighbors. So the results. Through this process, we used third-party evaluation from the University of Minnesota. And this evaluation was both of the jury members to see where they shifted in the 3 days, but also over time to assess how it impacts spread through the community. And some of the really key pieces were incredible. You can see here just overall how the general understanding around climate changed and climate issues. But the evaluation work also indicated that twice as many of the participants said they were willing or very willing to talk to their neighbors about the risks of extreme weather and climate change after the jury than before. Similarly, the number of participants who strongly agreed that there were actions that they could take to address these risks increased 7-fold. I'll go back one more slide. The last piece I want to say about this is this happens on a community base. It drives community action, civic action, but an important piece of this is to scale it up. And for 2 years now, we have built and addressed what's called a Rural Climate Network. And the goal of the network is really to connect rural communities and farmers with tools, ideas, and partners for adapting to climate change and mitigating its impact. The network itself has 35 organizations from across the country and is growing, and serves as a place for those who've gone through this to connect with resources and for us to aggregate policy needs and build it up on a regional and national level. So in conclusion, sustainable systems will really absolutely require the rural population to be empowered to see themselves as part of the solution, not just as contributors to the problem. The Rural Climate Dialogues not only helped rural communities think strategically and plan for this action, but it also empowers them and allows the community members to understand their starring role in the creation of good policies and their starring role in the creation of on-the-ground solutions. Following the first dialogue that we had in Morris, the participant Wes Flynn had this to say. On the back of the dollar bill is the motto, E pluribus unum, from many one. And I think we've shown that today. This is what it's about. We talk about liberal this, conservative that, Republicans this, Democrats that. At the end of the day, we are our government. We are the ones responsible for making these decisions. I'm thrilled and honored to be part of the process that reminds me why this grand experiment continues. Thank you. I'll look forward to questions. Also just wanted to note on the bottom is the URL for our Rural Climate Network, which has the full network there, and at the top actually has great links to both the dialogue process and the entire dialogue documentation of what happened in Morris. Thank you.